Detectives like Sherlock Holmes give us a lot to love. They're great at solving the unsolvable and putting the bad guys where they belong. Becoming a detective in real life, however, doesn't require a deer stalker, a magnifying glass, a trusty sidekick, or a distaste for human company. A good detective is empathetic, logical, charismatic, creative, and persistent. Think you have what it takes to be the next Sherlock Holmes? Take a shot at this set of riddles, hand-picked to test your sleuthing skills. The Baggy Suit. There was a shooting on Redford Street last night. You and your colleagues suspect Jeremy Thompson of the crime. It went like this. A man had been walking down the sidewalk when a stranger appeared and shot him in the stomach. Eyewitnesses testified that the suspect had blue eyes, sandy brown hair, and a baggy Armani suit, like the one Jeremy Thompson had been wearing. You and your partner sit down with Jeremy and ask him to tell his side of the story. Well, Jeremy started, I was just hanging out by the park when I saw a guy walking down the path. Suddenly, another man came up from behind and shot him. I ran home as fast as I could. You know right away that he's lying. How? The victim could not have been shot in the stomach by a man running up behind him. Did your sleuth's intuition fail you? Don't worry, there's plenty more where that came from. Oil ring smugglers. One of your colleagues went missing a few days before bringing the hammer down an oil smuggling ring. While inspecting his last known location, you find a note. 710-57735, 34-5508, 51-7718. You have 3 suspects in custody. Bill, Alex, and Eli. Can you break the detective's code and uncover the criminal's name? You've got 10 seconds. If you pointed the finger at Bill, you're right. When read upside down, the numbers read, Bill is boss, he sells oil. Let's try the next one. The suspicious woman. Somebody knocked on the door of Nancy's hotel room. She opened it to reveal an unknown man. Looking surprised, he spoke, I apologize, I thought this was my room. Tipping his hat, he turned away and headed to the elevator. The woman was immediately suspicious and dialed hotel security. You pick up the phone. Can you figure out what made her so nervous? Nobody would knock at the door of their own home. The scenario described above is actually a pretty common way for criminals to break into hotel rooms. If nobody answers, they bash their way inside and make off with your valuables. The hills are alive with the sound of death. Mr. and Mrs. Hall visited the mountains on their honeymoon. 3 days later, Mr. Hall returned home alone. He told police that his wife had fallen to her death during a hike. Less than 24 hours later, you arrest him for his wife's murder. Soon after, Mr. Hall confessed. Curious, he asked how you figured it out. You reply, I called your travel agent and asked for some information. What did you ask, and what did the travel agent say? Time's up. You asked how many tickets home Mr. Hall bought. Though he'd bought 2 to get there, he'd only bought 1 for the trip back. He never planned on his wife getting home. A Tale of 3 Brothers. A millionaire was found shot in the forehead in her own home. You spoke to the millionaire's sons, Leon, Louis, and Liam. All 3 of them were there when their mother was murdered. Leon told you that his mother had spent the evening at an official reception with him and Louis. All 3 of them entered the living room. His mother entered first, followed by Louis and then Leon himself. His mother, ready for a bubble bath, made her way up the stairs. That's when Liam entered the living room and shot their mother. Louis confirmed his story. Liam, meanwhile, said that he'd been out with friends all night. By the time he'd come home, his mother was already dead. You immediately know who killed the millionaire. How? Pause the video if you need more time. The answer is simple. Leon and Louis lied and are therefore the murderers. If Liam had shot his mother from the living room, the bullet would have hit her in the back of the neck. Only someone shooting from the front could have hit her in the forehead. The courtroom fiasco. A man is on trial for killing his wife. Though her body has not been found, there exists ample circumstantial evidence connecting the husband to the crime. In his final statement, the man's lawyer declares that the wife hasn't been killed and will enter the courtroom in just a moment. Everyone turns to look at the door. The defendant's lawyer waits a few moments before saying, "Your actions prove that you're not 100% sure that my client killed his wife. If you were, you wouldn't believe me." The jury immediately returns with a guilty verdict. What made them so sure of the defendant's guilt? The accused man never looked at the door. He was positive his wife wouldn't enter because he'd murdered her. Suicide or murder? A man was said to have jumped out of an apartment window and committed suicide. You are sent to investigate. You start by going to a room on the first floor that faces the dead man. You open the window and toss a penny out. You repeat these actions until you've reached the top floor. Moments later, you return to your team and declare the man murdered. What tipped you off? You've got 15 seconds. When somebody jumps out a window, they don't tend to close it behind them. On pain of death. One cold winter day, David went to visit his friend Aiden. Though he knocked and rang the doorbell, his friend never came to the door. The house was completely silent. Any thought that his friend wasn't home was quickly stopped by the sight of a light through a frozen window. Walking up to the window, David breathed on the frost-covered glass. Once it cleared, he could see Aiden lying in a pool of blood. He called the police. David was quickly arrested and declared the main suspect. Why? David didn't think his story through. Unless he was a dragon, he wouldn't be able to unfreeze the window by breathing on it from the outside, as it is usually frozen on the inside. Murder in the schoolyard. A history teacher was found murdered on the first day of the school year. Your careful detective work uncovered 4 suspects: the custodian, the biology teacher, the counselor, and the principal. There's one problem. All of them have alibis. The custodian was cleaning the bathroom. The biology teacher was grading midterms. The counselor was talking with a student. The principal was relaxing in her office. Alibi or no alibi, you find the suspect immediately. Who killed the history teacher? How do you know? The biology teacher is the murderer. According to him, he was holding a midterm. That's pretty hard to do on the first day of the year. The Hermit's murder. There was once a lonely old man. He led a quiet life and rarely left his home. One Friday, the mailman walked by and called out for the man. He was answered by silence. Concerned for the man's safety, the mailman looked inside the window and, to his horror, spotted the old man in a pool of blood. He called the police. When you arrived, you found Tuesday's newspaper, 2 bottles of warm milk and 1 bottle of cold milk. You arrested the killer the next day. Who's the killer, and how did you figure it out so quickly? The lack of a Wednesday or Thursday newspaper tells you it was the mailman. He skipped those days because he knew the old man was dead. Chemistry clues. A famous chemist was found murdered in his lab. There was no evidence but a sheet of paper with the name of a few chemicals on it: potassium, chlorine, and argon. On the day of his death, the chemist had been visited by 4 people: Lauren, Herbert, Clark, and Lori. You're able to arrest the murderer immediately. Who killed the chemist, and how do you know? The chemical abbreviations for the substances are K, Cl, and Ar. Rearranging them gives you the suspect's name. The aristocrat's death. Herbert Longfellow was murdered last Sunday night. There are 5 possible suspects: his wife, the chef, the maid, the gardener, and the butler. Every one of them has an alibi. The wife was reading a book by the fireplace. The cook was making breakfast. The butler was helping workers in the living room. The maid was washing dishes. The gardener was watering plants in the greenhouse. Right after hearing their testimonies, you're able to arrest the murderer. Who was it? The cook did it. There's thinking ahead, and then there's cooking breakfast on Sunday night. The Clean Getaway. You're on the hunt for an escaped criminal. You've tracked him and his getaway car down to one of 3 houses. But you can't make a move until you know his exact location. If you guess wrong, he'll bolt. Can you figure out where the fugitive's hiding? The murderer's in House B. He parked facing the street to ensure a quick getaway. The hands of a killer. Susan and Oliver lived with 4 of their friends. Oliver came home one day to find Susan dead on the sofa. He called the police. Your preliminary investigation concluded that Susan had only been killed a short time ago. You interrogated the couple's 4 friends. Mary had been cooking in the kitchen. Joshua was binging Orange is the New Black in his bedroom. Cal said that he'd spent the last 3 hours in the swimming pool. Lucy had been painting in her room. One look tells you who the liar and murderer was. Which friend was it? How do you know? The murderer was obviously Cal. Anyone who'd spent the last 3 hours in the swimming pool would look like a raisin. So how'd you do? If you aced this test and got 14 out of 14, maybe it's a sign that you're ready for the big leagues. Let me know which detective riddles left you stumped, or which felt like child's play in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching. Elementary, my dear viewers.